Hi there, my name is Tim, and I'm a botanist. Welcome to my YouTube channel. I've got a bachelor's degree in botany, and I earned my PhD studying tropical plant ecology. I've spent a lot of time thinking and learning about plants. Today I'm just sprinting through the forest and identifying plants. It's one of my favorite activities and one of the most cherished activities by botanists everywhere. We do this to train our mental acuity and push our physical limits. I really like plants. That's probably because they're the most important organisms on Earth. They transform sunlight into forms of energy all other living things require. No plants, no life. That said, can you remember any of the plants that you've seen today? Do you remember any of their names? Oh, hello. I am a real medical doctor. And if you answered no to any of these questions, you might be suffering from plant blindness. Don't worry, plant blindness isn't any sort of condition that medical doctors are worried about, but it is concerning for botanists like me. Let me explain. Plants are the dominant form of life on Earth. If you were to take all of the plants on Earth and all of the other living organisms on Earth and weigh them both, you'd find that plants outweigh all of those other living organisms by 5 times. Similarly, if you were to take the mass of all plants and all animals, you'd find that plants outweigh animals by 225 times. That's like the difference between the mass of a pineapple and the mass of a little grape. My point is, there are way more plants than there are animals, and animals are way less common than plants are. Why does the most dominant form of life on Earth go so unnoticed? Why are humans so zoocentric, or dare I say, zoochauvinist? Plant blindness, zoocentrism, zoochauvinism, whatever you want to call it, may result from how humans evolved. A few million years ago, early humans relied heavily on animals for food. It was probably beneficial for these early humans, our ancestors, to be able to identify and track moving animals, just as it was probably important to be able to identify and avoid threatening animals. As a result, humans may have evolved to focus more on animals than plants. Another reason why humans may have evolved to focus on animals rather than plants is because of animal movement. Our eyes take in way more information than our brains can process, and because of this, our visual systems are programmed to look for differences between frames. As a result, stationary plants are unlikely to trigger our visual senses like moving animals. Even the way most of us think about plants may contribute to plant blindness, and this way of thinking can be attributed to ancient Western philosophers. Plato and Aristotle are often credited with developing one of the first crude forms of classification of life. This system was later co-opted by Christianity in the Middle Ages and was termed the Great Chain of Being. This system organized life hierarchically. At the bottom of the chain were rocks and minerals. Above rocks and minerals were plants, because plants are alive and they sort of consume rocks and minerals through their roots. Animals were above plants because animals consume plants. And of course, humans represented one of the higher links in this great chain. Okay, so humans don't really notice plants. So what? Who cares? Well, these biases against plants are troubling because they influence things like laws and conservation efforts. Since no plants equal no life, we should probably care about conserving plants. Anyways, the Lacey Act of 1900 is a prime example of how plant blindness has influenced legislation and conservation efforts in the US. The Lacey Act is one of the first examples of legislation designed to protect wildlife against poaching and prevent the import of things like non-native invasive species that can have negative impacts on agricultural systems, ecosystems, and the economy. However, plants weren't even mentioned in the Lacey Act. Plants weren't even mentioned in the Lacey Act until 1981, when an amendment was made. And even after this, while the import of things like tiger parts or ivory was highly illegal, the vague language of the Lacey Act effectively made it legal to import things like endangered orchids and pitcher plants, and until another amendment was made in 2008. To this day, US federal law doesn't even consider plants wildlife, despite the fact that plants are wild and living. Plant blindness can also influence conservation funding. And for example, in the US in 2010, 60% of the endangered species were plants, but animals received 96% of the funding. Are you paying attention? I was looking at that raccoon. Ugh, it's gone now. Really? A trash panda? Well, if you were paying attention, what I was going to say is that you might be thinking, well, weren't some early humans hunter-gatherers? So wouldn't it have been beneficial if they were able to identify plants? Or you could be thinking, well, not all cultures have been steeped in Western philosophies or religions that look down on plants as lower life forms. And you'd be right. There are lots of examples of cultures that have non-hierarchical relationships with plants. For example, some Maori believe they have a kinship or a shared ancestry with plants. A Maori creation story describes that all things share a genealogical descent from a sky father and earth mother, and to know oneself is to know about your place in the lineage of animals and plants. Research shows that this feeling of kinship or shared ancestry with plants is one way to reduce plant blindness because it leads to a greater sense of empathy with them. However, you don't need a creation story or even have to accept evolution to develop a sense of empathy for plants. Simply knowing more about plants can lead to a greater appreciation for them and reduce plant blindness. This might sound strange to you, but it shouldn't. It's exactly what Charles Darwin proposed in his theory of natural selection in 1859. I get how it could feel weird to think of a plant as some distant relative like a great uncle or something that you've never met, but maybe that's because Darwin's theory of natural selection is relatively recent. Western culture is still steeped in centuries of baggage, like how we think of ourselves as separate rather than a part of nature. And it's probably going to take more time before we develop a deeper appreciation for our place in nature and natural selection. After all, we're still arguing about whether or not we should teach natural selection in schools. And that's one reason why I wanted to create this YouTube channel. I want to share information with you that will help you see plants in a new kind of way. And not only will this help with plant blindness, but I guarantee you that knowing a little bit more about the plants in your world will enrich your life in ways you don't yet realize. So, how can you learn more about the most fascinating and dominating form of life on Earth? Well, learning how to identify them. And that's what the first set of videos on this channel will be. I'll teach you how to identify common terrestrial vascular plant families. And if you don't know what terrestrial vascular plants are, don't worry, I'll go over that in my next video. But until then, I need to get back to it. So long. Where did I park the Tesla?